Okay, so let's complete this section. Only two exercises are left. The first one we have already solved. So let's see the second one. So in this one and the next one also, we are going to prove some statements that are equivalent to the axiom of choice. So this is about one such statement. Here what we have to prove is that, okay, let's see what is given. It starts off just like the axiom of choice. We have a set I, which is going to be an index set, so that for each level alpha in I, for each element alpha in I, there is a non-empty set X alpha. So that is precisely the hypothesis in the axiom of choice. But additionally, suppose also that the sets X alpha are mutually disjoint, that is distinct X alphas, X alpha and X beta. If the indices alpha and beta are distinct, then these two sets are disjoint, they do not have any common element. Then using the axiom of choice, we have to show that there is a set Y that intersects each X alpha at precisely one point. That is, the cardinality of this intersection is 1 for all alpha in I. So that is one thing. And conversely, we have to show that if the above statement is true, that means if there is a Y for such a given collection of disjoint non-empty sets X alpha and an index set I, of course, then the axiom of choice is true. So let's see the solution. So in the solution, just like how the exercise is phrased, we are first of all going to assume the axiom of choice, prove that such a Y exists, and then we will prove the converse. So let the axiom of choice be true. Okay, and let us just write all these things. Let I be a set and let for each element alpha in I, X alpha be a non-empty set. Such that, well, I have not written exactly what is written in the text. There are some elaboration. For example, the author says, after writing this part, he says that is Y intersects each X alpha in exactly one point in words. I haven't included those things, okay, and I also haven't included the hint that is given here. So we will see what comes in the solution. From that we will understand. Such that these are mutually disjoint for distinct elements alpha and beta in I. Now our job is to seek this set Y. Okay. Now the thing we are going to immediately do is apply the axiom of choice. By the axiom of choice, because we have the hypothesis that we have in the axiom of choice for this family of sets X alpha, namely that each X alpha is non-empty. So what does the axiom of choice say? It says that the Cartesian product of these X alphas is also a non-empty set. That means there is some I tuple, some element in that Cartesian product. That's where things start. By the axiom of choice, let us write at one go. there, instead of simply mentioning that the Cartesian product is non-empty, let's just also choose an element in it. There exists an element f in the Cartesian product of these x alphas. Okay. Now consider the set y which is f of I, the f image of I. We already know that this f, being an I tuple, is a function whose domain is I and whose range is the union of all these x alphas. Okay, so this f of I is our candidate for y. Now we have to show that this f of I intersects each x alpha at precisely one point. So let's see how that is true. For each alpha in I, f of alpha belongs to f of I, of course, because alpha is coming from I, so f of alpha will be an element in f of I. But at the same time, f of alpha also belongs to x alpha. Why? Because f is an I tuple. So by the definition of an I tuple, the image of the input alpha, which we also call sometimes the alphath coordinate of the I tuple, okay, which just simply is the image of alpha under F, that must belong to x alpha because it's an I tuple. Okay, so that's where this thing is coming from. So f of alpha belongs to this, i.e. f of alpha belongs to the intersection of f of I and x alpha. But is this the only element in this intersection? We want that, right? We want to show that this is the only element. But let's see if that is the case. So what now we do, we take any element in this and prove that that element must be equal to this element. Let y be some element in this intersection. Okay, then there exists some element beta in I such that y is equal to f of beta. But why is that so? That is because y being in this intersection must belong to f of I. So it should be the f image of something from I. Let that something be beta. But now okay, so how should I show this? I mean, what I am now trying to say is that beta is equal to alpha. Should I show this directly, or let me just suppose that beta is not equal to alpha and arrive at a contradiction? I think that would be better, no? Suppose that beta is not equal to alpha. Okay, since y equal to f of beta belongs to C, besides belonging to f of I, y also belongs to x alpha. So that means f of beta belongs to x alpha. Belongs to x alpha, we must have x beta equal to x alpha. Why? Since we already have f of beta in x beta. Do you see how we have got this? Because f is an I tuple, so f of beta by the definition of f being an I tuple must belong to x beta. But at the same time, since it's also y which is in x alpha, so f of beta also belongs to x alpha, right? But we know that the x alphas are mutually disjoint, that is, distinct x alphas for different values of alpha, of course, they do not intersect. So that means because we are getting a common element here in x beta and x alpha, so they cannot be distinct, they have to be the same. But that is impossible since beta is different from alpha. However, then x alpha intersection x beta is equal to it will be x alpha and also x beta because they have been concluded to be equal, and that is non-empty. But it should have been empty because beta is different from alpha. This contradicts the hypothesis. So that means our last supposition is wrong. That is, beta cannot be different from alpha. They have to be the same thing. So we must have beta equal to alpha. But then y, which is f of beta, is just simply f of alpha. And that's how we have proved that this is the only element in this intersection. So f of I intersection x alpha is in fact this singleton set. And that's what we wanted to show, right? F of I intersects each x alpha at precisely one point, so that the cardinality of all these intersections are equal to 1. So that completes the proof of the first part. The axiom of choice implies that such a y exists. Now we go for the converse. Conversely, let the given condition, well, it's not just a condition, it's a statement. Let the given statement about the existence of y be true, and that is understandable. What we mean, what we are trying to say here, it's clearly understood from the context. so that we don't have to again write all the things about the existence of y be true. And now our aim is to prove the axiom of choice. So to prove the axiom of choice, we first of all have to have the hypothesis that we have in the axiom of choice, namely a family of non-empty sets. So let I be any set, and for each alpha in I, let x alpha be a non-empty set. Our aim is to now prove that the Cartesian product of these x alphas is non-empty, because that's what the axiom of choice asserts, right? Now the problem in immediately applying the hypothesis this time, which is the existence of that y, is that although we have a family of non-empty sets, but these non-empty sets are not necessarily disjoint, mutually disjoint. They may have intersections, who knows? Now, this hypothesis that we have in the axiom of choice does not assume disjointness. It's just some family of non-empty sets. There may be intersections. But the trick here is that we are going to replace this family with another family, again of non-empty sets, again indexed by that same index set I. But that new family will have sets that are mutually disjoint. So let's see what that is. Now, consider the family of sets So we replace each x alpha with this Cartesian product of x alpha and the singleton set consisting of the level alpha. This family again is indexed by I. For each alpha in I there is a set, now this Cartesian product. Clearly, these sets are non-empty, but at the same time now they are mutually disjoint also. Oh, disjoint, okay, it will be empty. I will provide more explanation of how exactly these remarks are true, okay. For distinct alpha and beta in I. Okay. So let us first come to the non-emptiness part. We already know that for each alpha in I, x alpha is non-empty. So because x alpha is non-empty and this singleton set of course is non-empty, so the Cartesian product is non-empty by the definition of Cartesian product of two sets. And why are distinct sets of this form disjoint now, which previously was not necessarily the case? That's because you imagine an arbitrary element in this set, first set. What is that element? That element is an ordered pair, right? Alpha, comma something, say x, and that x is coming from x alpha. Now, can this belong to this set though? Is it possible if alpha and beta are distinct? No. Why? Because for that to be the case, alpha must come from the first set and x must come from the second set. Well, x may come from the second set, okay, because we don't know that these x alphas are mutually disjoint. They may not be disjoint. So this single x may belong to x alpha as well as x beta. However, this alpha cannot belong to this if alpha and beta are distinct, because the only element in this set is beta and that cannot be alpha if they are different. So that's why this is disjoint. And now on this family we can apply our hypothesis this time because of this disjointness. So let's do that. So by the hypothesis, there exists a set y, let's also call this y is a general name, such that the cardinality of the intersection of y with each such set from this new family is equal to 1 for each alpha in I. And because of this uniqueness, this singletonness of this intersection, we can give this unique element some name. Let the intersection be, do not make any mistake here, the element is going to be an ordered pair, because the element, of course, it will be in y, but it also has to be an element here in this Cartesian product, the first coordinate of which must be alpha, of course, but the second coordinate is dependent on alpha in such a way that for a given alpha it is only one unique element, because that's how we are getting a unique ordered pair, right? So it depends on alpha, and let us express that dependence by writing alpha in the suffix. To prove the axiom of choice, we have to prove that the Cartesian product of the x alphas is non-empty. So we are now seeking an I tuple, right, whose alpha coordinate must belong to the set x alpha. And you can almost see what we should do next from these things. Define f from, in this part I haven't used f before now, okay. Define f from I into the union of the x alphas, because that's how an I tuple should be, and the definition of f is this: f of alpha is defined to be equal to x alpha. So it's a function. Is it a well-defined function? That is the first job. Whenever you define a new function, you first make sure that it's well-defined. What that means is that for each input in the domain, the output must belong to the range and should be unique. Okay. What is our input? Alpha, which is coming from I, of course. The output is x alpha. The uniqueness that we are talking about here proves that this x alpha is unique. For a given alpha, we have only one x alpha. Okay. And this x alpha, of course, belongs to this union. In fact, particularly it actually belongs to that set X alpha itself. So let's write these things. Since for alpha belonging to I, X alpha is a unique element in that union, of course, but more specifically in that X alpha. So that's why this F is in fact an element in the Cartesian product of the X alphas. Hence, F belongs to this Cartesian product, i.e. the Cartesian product is non-empty, and that is the axiom of choice. That is the conclusion of the axiom of choice. So the axiom of choice is true. And that's where the solution ends. So we now have an equivalent statement for the axiom of choice, which is about the existence of that set Y. Now let's see the next one, which also talks about another equivalent statement. And this is the last exercise in this section. Let A and B be sets and there is a surjective function such that there exists a surjection G from B into A, an onto function from B to A. Using the axiom of choice, show that there then exists an injection here. Show that there then, well, the exact language doesn't matter, the fact matters, that there exists an injection, an injective function f from A into B such that the composition of f and G, that is G composition f, which of course is a function from A into A, is the identity map. Okay, not just any injective function, but one which is related to G by this fact. Okay, their composition is this identity map. And something else is also said, and in particular, a consequence of this thing is that the cardinality of A is lesser or equal to the cardinality of B. In fact, that's what we say when there is an injective function from A to B. So I'm not going to write that, okay. It's just a remark, passing remark. hint is given, which also there is no need to write the hint because we are going to see the solution. Conversely, let's in fact write the converse. Show that if the above statement is true, for arbitrary sets A and B and surjections G from B to A. Well, surjections plural because there can be many onto functions from B to A, right? Not just a unique one. Then the axiom of choice is true. Okay, so let's get down to business and start writing the solution. So first of all, we have to prove, we have the axiom of choice. We have to prove that such an f exists, which is an injective function. So let the axiom of choice be true. And let A, B be sets and G from B to A be a surjection running out of ink. Okay, so now we have to somehow apply the axiom of choice and define this function f and prove that it has these properties. So for that I want a family of non-empty sets. Okay, and this is how we are going to do it. Consider the family of sets. In fact, it's already given in the hint. What is it? What is this family? For this family, the index set is A. So the I here is A, and for each element A in A, the set XA is the inverse image of A under G, which is a set. We already know that. Okay. Note that for each A in A, this is a non-empty set. Not writing the fact that this is a set separately, that's something we already know, but it is non-empty since G is onto, that means surjective. Why? That's because that just simply comes directly from the ontoness or surjectivity of G, that every element A What is A? A is the range of G, right here. So for any element A in A, the inverse image of that element under G consists of what? Consists of precisely those elements in B whose G images are all equal to A. Now because G is onto, there is at least one such inverse image. And this is the set of all inverse images. So that's why it is non-empty. Also, there is another fact that is true about this family, not just non-emptiness, but the sets here are mutually disjoint. That is also there. Let's see how. Well, we are just simply going to write the fact, but we will see how. For distinct A and B in capital A. It is something we in fact know about functions, but still let's see again. Why? Let's see. Suppose this intersection is not empty, then it will have some element, say x. Then by the definition of, by the very meaning of these inverse images, since x belongs to G inverse of A, so G of x is equal to A. And similarly, since x belongs to G inverse of B, G of x will be equal to B. But then A and B should be the same element, no? However, they are distinct. So that's why whenever they are distinct, these inverse images are in fact disjoint sets. So we can now use the axiom of choice, or rather that equivalent statement that we got in the previous exercise, which is equivalent to the axiom of choice. We have already proved it, and because now our family is not just a family of non-empty sets but mutually disjoint sets, so a capital Y exists. So by the previous exercise 842, right? There exists a set Y such that the cardinality of the intersection of Y with G inverse of A is equal to 1 for each element A in A. And because of this fact, we can give that element some name that will depend on A. Let this be x suffix A. And just like before, now this will help us define a function, this time from A into B, and that will be the f that we are seeking. A into B such that well, okay, I got a little confused here. We are going to define a function from A into B. So that means I am going to take an, okay, fine. F of A is defined to be equal to XA. What got me confused here? For a moment I thought how is it that XA belongs to B? But XA belongs to B, right? Why? Because we know that the inverse image G inverse of A is a subset of B. So this X alpha, XA being an element of G inverse of A must come from B. Clearly, F is well defined. How? For a given input A from A, this XA belongs to B. That is one thing. And uniqueness of XA proves that the output, there is only one output for a given input. So that's why F is well defined. And the other fact about F is this. Also, F is injective How is F injective? We will just simply mention since distinct inverse images under G are disjoint. This fact. But let's look at it somewhat more closely though. Exactly why does this imply injectivity of F? So for injectivity, what is it we should do? You can do one of the two things. I am doing one of them. Say A and A prime be two elements in A whose F images are equal. Okay. Now, by definition of F, Fa is what? Xa. And Fa prime is Xa prime. Well, these are just simply names given to the output. But what are the properties of these elements? Xa by definition belongs to G inverse of A. Okay. So Xa belongs to G inverse of A. But Xa prime belongs to G inverse of A prime. And we know that distinct inverse images are disjoint. Here, however, it is not disjoint. Of course, there is this element. So that means they must be the same. That is, this must be equal to this. And from that equality, it becomes clear that A must be equal to A prime. Do you want to see how? That's because since we did not in fact consider equality also, not that way. Xa belongs to G inverse of A prime. We can see that from here, right? So, what is G of Xa? It must be equal to A prime. However, what is G of Xa? In fact, since Xa at the same time belongs to G inverse of A as well, it is also equal to A. So that's how A is equal to A prime. And that's why F is injective. So we now have our function F from A into B, which is injective. But something else is also there in the claim, namely that G composition F is the identity map. Let's also just simply mention that, and G composition F from this is the identity map. Again, let's see how. Actually, these are not very difficult things to verify, so I'm just simply skipping the details. Let's take an arbitrary element of A, capital A, small a. On that, we apply this. What is f of a? Xa. But because Xa by definition comes from G inverse of A, its G image is equal to A. So you see that G composition F has no effect on A. It will have no effect on any element of A. So it is the identity map. So that's how it's the identity map. So that means we have done one half of our thing, and now we go for the converse. Conversely, let for any sets A and B and surjection G from B to A, there exists an injection F from A to B such that G composition F from A to A is the identity map. And our aim now is to prove the axiom of choice, but we won't prove the axiom of choice itself, but rather the equivalent statement that we got in the previous exercise. So accordingly, let us consider a family of non-empty sets that are mutually disjoint. Let I be a set and for each alpha in I, let X alpha be a non-empty set, be a set such that X alpha intersection X beta is empty for distinct alpha and beta in I. Do you see again and again how much we have to write these things? This is why mathematical symbols have been developed, which will at one go mean many things. However, unless we know the meanings, the symbols are meaningless and seem extremely abstract, which is why mathematics looks the way it is. It becomes manageable to write these things, however, it looks abstract and quite intimidating. Alright, so now what is our aim? Our aim is to prove that there is such a set Y, because then by the previous exercise, the axiom of choice will be true. But we have to be able to apply our hypothesis, right? Which demands that we have such a surjective function G from B to A. What will be the G now in this situation for us? Let's see. Define the function G from some set B to some set A. This B for now is going to be the union of the sets X alpha, and in place of a we are choosing I, say. And the function that we are going to define is this. I mean, g is going to define this way. G of x is equal to alpha if x belongs to x alpha. Then again, is this g well defined? Note that g is well defined because the x alphas are mutual. Let me just first write, then I will explain. Mutually disjoint and G is surjective or onto same thing because each x alpha is non-empty. So first we come to the well-definedness. Okay. So so let's see how the function g is working. You are choosing an input x from this union. If that x belongs to the set x alpha, then by the definition of g, the image is alpha. Since this x is coming from the union, it of course belongs to at least one x alpha, so that we have at least one image alpha. However, it cannot belong to more than one x alpha, distinct x alphas. That is because they are mutually disjoint, and that is why whatever x alpha x must be in, that is unique, and that's why for that given x, alpha is unique, and alpha of course is in I. So that's how g is well defined. And how is g onto? That's because you choose an arbitrary element in the range, say beta. We want to show that there is an inverse image of beta under the function g. You look at x beta. Since x beta is non-empty, there is something in x beta, right? At least one element. But then by the definition of this function, g of y is equal to beta. So that's it. Your inverse image of beta under g is y, which exists. So that's why g is onto. So now by our induction hypothesis, there will be a one-to-one function going in the other direction from I into this. So now there exists an injection f from I into the union of x alpha such that there is that other thing also. Okay, don't forget that that's not all. G composition f from I into I is the identity map. But what is our aim now? Our aim now is to prove that there is such a set y, capital Y, which will intersect each x alpha at precisely one point. And that I, of course, is going to be f of I. I hope I have not messed things up. Yeah. Now, consider the set y equal to f of I. All right. Yeah, it's a bit tiring going through so much, but anyway. So now our job is to prove that this intersects each x alpha at precisely one point. And that point is likely going to be f of alpha. For each alpha in I, f of alpha belongs to f of I, of course, because alpha is coming from I, but we also have to prove that this f of alpha belongs to x alpha. Okay. How are we going to prove it? Let's see. Also, and this is where we are going to use the fact that G composition F is an identity map from I to I, and alpha is an element in I. So G composition F will not change alpha. If you take alpha as input, the output you will get back is also alpha. That's why alpha is equal to G composition F of alpha, which is G of f of alpha. Okay. G of f of alpha. Which implies what? If G of f of alpha is equal to alpha, then f of alpha will belong to the inverse image of alpha under G, by definition of inverse images. From this equation we get f of alpha belonging to the inverse image of alpha under G. And we actually know what this inverse image is. You recall the definition of G. What is G? G of x is equal to alpha if, and because it's a definition, in a definition if means if and only if. Okay, so in the union of all the x alphas, a part of it is x alpha, and if your input is coming from here, then only the output is alpha, otherwise not, by the definition of G. So G inverse of alpha is going to be precisely this set, x alpha. So f alpha being in f of I, besides that, also belongs to x alpha. Hence, f of alpha belongs to this. Now again we have to prove that this is the only element in this intersection. So let y be any element in this intersection. Then y is here as well as here. Because y is here, so y is equal to f of something. That something must come from I. So then there exists that something, let's call that something beta, such that y is equal to f of beta. Okay, but y belongs to x alpha, and so g of y, what will be g of y? G of y by the definition of g must be equal to alpha, right? Hence, so bringing all these pieces together, what do we have? Hence, alpha is equal to, what is y? Y is f of beta, right? G of f of beta, but that is the G composition f image of beta. However, G composition f is the identity map and beta is an element of I. So the G composition f image of beta is nothing but beta itself. So we now have established that alpha is equal to beta. Hence, y is equal to f of beta, but which in fact is f of alpha. So the intersection of f of I and x alpha is this singleton set. That means f of I is in fact that capital Y that we are seeking. Well, it is Y by definition, that's just a symbol, but it has that property. It intersects each x alpha at precisely 1 point. So that means the statement in the previous exercise is true, that namely which talks about the existence of that y. So by the previous exercise, automatically the axiom of choice is also true, because we have already shown that this statement and the AOC, the axiom of choice, are equivalent. Hence, the AOC is true. Man, these things can get really confusing. So unless we are paying absolutely close attention, we will make some mistake inevitably. Hence, by exercise 842, the axiom of choice is true. You can make this part a little more elaborate by writing that hence such a set y this y has that property, it intersects each x alpha precisely once, and then write hence by the equivalence of this with the axiom of choice from exercise 842, the axiom of choice is true. But anyway, we are done. So this completes this set of exercises, it also completes this section, and after this, in fact, there is another section which treats order relations. We have already developed the order relation gradually in the system of natural numbers, then in the system of integers, rational numbers, real numbers. But abstracting the notion of order relations itself, there is a world of general orders. So the next section is about that, but I am going to skip it because it's not as central to what we are going to see next. So instead, in the next analysis video, we are going to straight away go to the next chapter, which talks about limits of functions. So we are going to enter the calculus proper. So that is the next thing we are going to do. And our next upload is this Tuesday. And on Tuesday, because we have already treated graph theory once more, so next Tuesday let's go back to group theory from Herstein. So with that I end this video. So see you Tuesday. Until then, this is me, Lucifer, from A Mathematical Group. Have a nice night.